Welcome to my reflective journal for ESE 4323 Classroom Assessment. Our first line is Assessments in Action. One of the unifying aspects of the videos I chose is the emphasis on cross-curricular project-based learning. This past school year, I worked with the American Sign Language teacher at our school on a cross-curricular project covering the Americans with Disabilities Act. Each of our classes focused on a different aspect of the ADA. It was a great first attempt at a cross-curricular PBL, yet our classes did not have much overlap. Going forward, I'd like to use High-Tech High's project as a model. The students from both classes creating one unified project. We did not have as many overlapping students, so due to logistical reasons, our classes did not have much interaction. Next school year, I will try to work with a teacher who teaches many of the same students that I have. An early idea that I have discussed with a statistic teacher is to create a project based around political polling. We can then have our students perform real-world experimentation by conducting a poll of the school. The next area of the journal review is the textbook assessments review. The first area are the selection questions. The first question I chose, which of the following are characteristics of a state? Population and sovereignty, sovereignty and a military, public projects and a government, or territory and a legal system? The Bloom's taxonomy is knowledge. This question is incredibly simplistic and straightforward. A possible revision would be to ask the student to describe the characteristics of a state through a supply question format. The next question is very similar. Again, knowledge for Bloom's taxonomy, and again, straight memorization. A possible revision would be to ask the student to explain the differences between social contract theory and the divine right of kings. The third question I chose is the supreme power of a state to act within its territory and have absolute authority over its internal and external affairs is called. Again, this is a knowledge question. Again, straight memorization. They ask for the term which matches the definition given. A possible revision would postulate a scenario concerning a country in foreign meddling, and the student would be asked, knowing what we know from these facts, is this a sovereign nation? The last two questions I chose were true and false questions. Again, both of them on the Bloom's taxonomy chart assess knowledge, and the student either knows the question, and they either know the answer or they don't. It's my opinion to avoid this type of question altogether. There's no easy revision to change it to a higher level question for number 19. However, for number 20, this is a knowledge, another straight recitation of facts. A possible revision would be to provide an example of competition in the market and ask whether this example means they live in a free enterprise system. For our supply questions, I chose 5 from the textbook. First, compare and contrast the presidential system with the parliamentary system. The Bloom's taxonomy is analysis. This is an effective question. The next question I chose, the Bloom's taxonomy, is knowledge and comprehension. This is an effective question because students have to know the core ideals, have historical knowledge of an area, and explain how these core ideals failed a great many Americans of the time. The next question, describe the ideal role of people and of government in a free enterprise system. Again, comprehension. This is an effective question. Compare and contrast the views held by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau on government and social contract. This is analysis, and this is also an effective question. And the fifth one I chose was a fill-in-the-blank question. According to philosopher fill-in-the-blank, any violation of the people's natural rights by government provided grounds for rebellion. This is a knowledge question. And this, again, is a basic recitation of fact. To improve it, it should more closely resemble the question immediately preceded it here on the list. Again, that compare and contrast views held by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. We're now going to move to the performance assessment design aspect of the journal review. The standard I chose was analyze the structures, functions, and processes of the executive branch as described in Article 2 of the Constitution. I created a performance assessment this past school year, which is going to be perfectly aligned with this standard. The assessment we chose and I created was a first 100 days podcast. As you can read through, you can see that I have an example recorded through Spreaker, which is a podcasting app that I did for myself. You can pause here and click and listen to that at the website. And you can see the instructions for the podcast. The basic instructions are every 2 weeks. Every week, 2 students will recap at least 3 newsworthy events or developments of the previous week in President Trump's administration. They will reference reputable sources, so like the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, National Review, The Atlantic, Politico, etc., and present a narrative of the state of the president and his administration from many possible perspectives. The podcast should resemble a news segment in tone and presentation. This means the podcaster must be as impartial as possible despite any personal political leanings. An ideal length would be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 minutes. And the podcaster will submit a hard copy written transcript of their podcast with sourcing and references. They will also submit to Canvas the direct link to the podcast through Spreaker. A sample election podcast, again, as I said, is linked above. They'll email it. Also, if they have any questions, they can email me, bruce.waddell@bvhs.org. The rubric is out of 20 points. This was counted for a test grade. There's 5 criteria, which will be graded on a scale of 0 to 4 points, 0 being worst, 4 best. So content, sources, impartiality, length, and presentation and quality. So after I assigned this, I reflected upon it in the first semester, and I made some modifications for the second. So this performance assessment is a modification from an assessment that I assigned in the fall semester. It was intended for seniors in high schools, and it is a real-world application of the topic we were covering during the executive branch unit. In the fall, the project was centered around the day-to-day goings-on of the campaign and related directly to the politics and campaign unit of the text. I made it explicitly clear that this was to be as unbiased and nonpartisan as possible. However, tempers flared between students. This was an issue that I eventually escalated, and we had to de-escalate in a class and through administration. Another issue I encountered was students not bothering to turn in the script and sourcing through Canvas on the day it was due, despite having the podcast completed. In the spring semester, when I made the modifications, I made a change from a digital turn-in to a hard copy turn-in. I also allowed students to use other recording apps like GarageBand or iMovie due to technical issues that we were having with Spreaker. The next area of reflection is the technology tools for assessment. One of the tools that I really love and fell in love with was Kahoot. Several years ago, I attended a professional development workshop at an Apple-certified high school on the East Coast. One of the school's tools that we used, introduced us to during those 3 days, was Kahoot. I was in my first year teaching and had been at a loss as to how to best approach test review. I immediately saw the potential and application in the classroom for this tool. I primarily use Kahoot for formative assessment. That means it is for guided instruction and improving student learning. To the students, Kahoot is a fun and competitive way to review. They want to do well. To me as the teacher, the role it provides and the data it generates are incredibly helpful. At the end of every session, the application automatically generates a results spreadsheet, which I'll walk through the next couple of slides. The first page of the sheet identifies the total percentage correct and incorrect answers, the average score, and the student feedback. Did you learn something? And how do you feel? The second page provides a ranked final score for each student. The third page is the question summary showing how each student performed on each question. The next, however many pages correspond to each question, breaking down on each page each question into categories like players, correct percentage, and average time taken to answer. The final page of the spreadsheet report holds all of the raw data gathered by the application, and I've included an example of this. The data provided by the spreadsheet report is incredibly helpful because I can easily identify the areas of learning which are uncertain and that I need to address further before the unit assessment. In addition, it will help me identify the areas where I need to modify instruction and lesson planning going forward. So some examples of how you navigate through the app. This is an example of what kind of Kahoot assessment you're going to create. This is a quiz, and you can see there's a title, description, who it's visible to, the language, the audience, which of course is a school, and then we can navigate through. After completing that page, you then begin the process of adding and creating the questions. You can see how this first setup, you can choose many different types of questions. You can choose true, false. You can choose multiple choice. You can choose a time limit. You can add images, video to the background of the questions as well. So once you go and create your quiz, create your assessment, you then give it to the students. And once they're completed, we then have the results. And you can see here, this is the spreadsheet of all the results and all the data that is given to me as the teacher. You can see overview, which includes total correct answers, total incorrect answers, average score, feedback, which is incredibly helpful. How fun was it? Did you learn something? Do you recommend this? How do you feel? Are you positive? Are you neutral? Are you negative? And this is a good thing to have in regards to student mentality before we begin and before we move on to assessment. You can see that there's final scores, question summary. You can see then It breaks down each individual question. And the final last page, we have the raw data, which kind of breaks everything out into just the raw numbers. And that's a huge spreadsheet. Following the test, we can move on to the case study reflections. I chose the Chapter 4 case study where Karen, a first-year Spanish teacher, took over for a class partway through the year. I immediately related to the situation because my first year in teaching started in a similar way. I am in contact with the school regarding some substitute teaching opportunities to make some money while I look for a new job. A teacher they had hired was having incredible difficulty with classroom management and instruction. Eventually, the situation became so untenable that they had to part ways with her at the end of the first quarter. They asked me if I was interested in teaching full-time, and I decided to explore the opportunity. I immediately encountered a situation similar to Karen's. Unruly students who had no structure whatsoever in the classroom. There were 6 classes of freshmen and juniors ranging from college prep, which is our lowest level, to honors. I was immediately challenged by students who hoped they could take advantage of me. Did I ever feel lost and helpless like Karen? No, but I can totally empathize with her situation. So moving on to her specific example and the one student who seemed to be the biggest area of controversy. The issue with Jeff is a classic case of an underachieving student who needs to be challenged and pushed in a constructive manner. He simply did not care that he was punished in a harsh manner for cheating. His being made an example of was what he wanted because all he cared about was attention, whether it was from the teacher or from his classmates. And of course, every student is different and responds differently to adversity. For Jeff, she could have tried handling his cheating confidentially by asking to speak with him after class, expressing her disappointment, and giving him possibly the opportunity to retake the test for partial credit. But the key is doing it in such a way that is outside of the eyes and the view of his classmates. Kind of maintain that confidentiality. In regards to his lunch behavior, she needed to address the situation with her administration and try to reach some kind of solution, compromise. Could she made a compromise where he did not choose her period every single day? He chose 5th period or a different period where he could come in late or stay longer in, etc. There should have been a solution provided by administration. And the fact that she didn't reach out to administration, or if they, any reaching out fell on deaf ears, that's an issue that she needs to work through. But the big key that I see and I read and I pretty much immediately noticed is that at no point throughout the case study does it say she tried to notify his parents about his behavior. By speaking with them, she could address most of these issues and try to come to a solution. Further, she could possibly be made aware of any circumstances in his home life that are driving his behavior. Again, parental divorce, family illness. I directly dealt with a situation as a teacher where a student was continually acting out, continually acting disrespectful, continually trying to push my nerves and his other teacher's nerves. And finally, I sat down and I spoke and I said, is there something going on in your life? And he did. He opened up. He became emotional. His parents were going through a divorce. And we talked about it. And immediately, because I showed that I cared, his rude behavior, his acting out, immediately ceased. And that's something that, I don't think you tell first-year teachers. It's something I think you just kind of, comes with maturity, comes with age. And in her situation, she's right out of college. She's not probably had much experience with, people in an environment like this. And that's going to come. And of course, these are all mistakes made by a first-year teacher. And in time, as I said, she's going to learn that she's not on an island with these students and that she has a support system in place to help guide her through the process. So that's my reflection of the semester. It's been an incredible semester. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it. I'm going to directly use a lot of the things that I learned about assessment into my class in the fall and next year.